Thank you. The following is one of my voiceover demos. If you're a voiceover artist and you would like to advertise one of your demos on my podcast, please send an MP3 to thedrill12, all one word, at gmail.com. That's thedrill12 at gmail.com. Back in a minute.
Americans love scenery. We want to see it all, from one coast to the next, Mount Rushmore down to the Everglades. So hop into a Chevy Malibu and take the scenic route. It's the car you knew America could build. There's a place where people count on friendships they can trace back generations, where they can count on the same stool at the coffee shop waiting for them every morning. This place is called Glen Ellen, and you can find it in every bottle of Glen Ellen wine. This is craft brewed Herman Joseph's, the smoothest, easiest drinking specialty beer in the entire solar system. And I believe you'll find drinkable in the dictionary right after don't order a beer you can't drink. Zoingo! Boingo! The freestyle pogo with more boing, more bounce. Bounce further, bounce higher with Zoingo Boingo. To see what makes Arrowhead Mountain Spring water different from those other waters, you have to go back to the source. And with Arrowhead, that means going back a little farther and longer than most. Between security challenged and security strengthened, there's one important word: how. And it is the how that makes all the difference to our nation and our world. Lockheed Martin. We never forget who we're working for. What makes Kraft Singles so good? 2 out of every 3 kids don't get the recommended amount of calcium. But with Kraft Singles, they get a good source of calcium and the taste they love. Kraft Singles. Magic every single time. Throw boring overboard with a new real meal from Long John Silver's. A meal worthy of a plate. Just $4.99. Only at Long John Silver's. We may not all be geniuses, but we can all do something smart. Introducing the Hyundai 199 Sonata Lease. It's a smart deal on a really smart car.
I used to date according to astrological signs. If a woman believed in astrology, I would not date her. Ooh, a divided room. I think it's just different perspectives. I think either you're an astrology person or you're a science person. I just think that, I'm sorry to say, astrology is a bit more self-centered. Because with science, you look out at all the stars and you go like, wow, the universe is huge and I'm just a tiny part of it. Then with astrology, you look at it all the same stars and you go, what does all that say about me? Like, what does that galaxy have to do with my personality? Because it's got to be something. You see those stars over there that are so far away, it takes millions and millions of years for light from them to even reach us? That's why I'm late to stuff. It's the only explanation.
Good morning. It's Thursday, Bad News Thursday, August the 29th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and bad news. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
God save our 13 states. Long live United States. God save our states. Make us victorious
Thank you. And now, Stuart Varney with Varney and Company.
Wait for that, and that's, 2 weeks away, September 10th. Thanks for being here. We'll see you again tomorrow. Varney and Company picks it up now. Stu, take it away.
All right. Good morning, Maria, and good morning, everyone. It is the day after NVIDIA's report late Wednesday, the reaction Thursday morning. Maybe their earnings failed to live up to the extreme hype. The stock is down. But revenue was up 120%, a $50 billion stock buyback, and the CEO says demand for chips is, quote, incredible. Apparently, that's not good enough. The stock is down $4. That would be 3.3%. We're going to follow it all day long. Expect volatility. Big gain for the Dow, looking at new record highs today. Economic growth revised higher from 2.8 to 3%. The market likes it. The Dow up well over 250 points. S&P up 15. And the Nasdaq, despite NVIDIA, is up 55 points. Let's get to politics. This is Kamala Harris's big day. She and her running mate are taping an interview with CNN, which will be broadcast tonight. Heavy criticism. The Wall Street Journal calls Tim Walz her interview crutch. How will she explain her flip-flops on countless issues? Her campaign is playing defense. She's not appearing alone, and the interview will be released on a Thursday night in high summer, right before a long holiday weekend. Trump takes to the road today. He will be in Michigan and Wisconsin. The Trump-Vance team is dealing with Vance, telling Harris to go to hell. And new Fox polls show Harris with a very slight lead in Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada. Trump leads in North Carolina by just 1 point. On the show today, the Houthis set a tanker on fire in the Red Sea. It carries 1 million barrels of oil, and it's leaking, risking a spill 4 times larger than the Exxon Valdez. Where are the environmentalists? Not a word. Vital shipping lanes disrupted. Where is the president? Answer, he's on the beach on vacation for the 2nd week. Thursday, August 29th, 2024, Varney and Company is about to begin.
And that was Varney and Company. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now Varney and Company, and it's about the FBI.
We appreciate that. Congressman Walz, thanks very much, sir.
Thank you.
Now, the FBI confirmed that the Trump shooter researched events for both political parties, but he saw the Trump rally as, quote, a target of opportunity. But there's still no motive.
No motive. But the FBI did review 5 years of the shooter, Thomas Matthew Crook's online history, and they found, and I quote, a sustained, detailed effort to plan an attack on some event, meaning he looked at any number of events or targets, and then when this event was announced, he became hyper-focused on that specific event and looked at it as a target of opportunity, end quote. So the FBI says that beginning late last year, Crooks...
So that's the key words there. The FBI says. The problem is that Fox has noted that the FBI has become weaponized by the Biden administration. So why would we take the word, and because that's what the FBI is doing, they're making an arbitrary claim. They're demanding we take their word for it. And so why would we take their word for it when we know, or at least we suspect, that they have been weaponized? That means that they have become a weapon of the administration. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the military short.
One thing that a helicopter pilot never, ever wants to experience is to be alone on the ground. It's not something they teach you in flight school. They teach you to fly. They teach you to stay in the air. I was in country probably a month and a half, 2 months, and we were inserting some troops into an outpost. And coming out, we took all kinds of fire, and we were taking hits. We noticed the gauges going from green to red. We were losing engine RPM. We found the safest area that we thought we could find, and we got her on the ground. The protocol is pull the radios, pull the guns. Usually have a survival vest on. It's got a Prick 25 radio in it, and you keep calling because somebody will eventually hear you. What time we spent on the ground seemed like an eternity, and we were waiting. Finally, help shows up. Slick's coming in, the prettiest thing you ever seen, and you heard it long before you ever. It's amazing how quiet it is on the ground. So we were fortunate enough to be picked up.
And that was the Patriotic Short. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit of motivation.
I didn't get here making excuses. You got to get to the point where it hurts. I got sick and tired of being sick and tired. But I'm not going to cry about it. No, I'm not a part of the country club. Nope, I'm not. I don't hang out with them. But I'm still going to be successful. I'm still going to get to where they are. Why? Because I owe it to myself. And can't nobody stop me but me. You will not destroy us. You will not defeat us to the day I die. It's your mental toughness, your mental strength. We can, we will, and we must get through this. This is what's so sweet about success. That as long as you stay in failure, that you get satisfied with that. When you actually come over to success, it's the same thing. Like, you gotta have more and more and more of it. Just like when you're in poverty, you can keep doing it. When you become successful, so I went with the master's degree. Then when I went with the PhD, we came out with an album. I wrote 3 books. Are you hearing what I'm telling you? Now I'm at a point where I have this sensational desire for more success. So after I finish with the degree, now I start working out. I'm ready to hit this marathon. Now I got another book coming. Now I'm trying to win a Nobel Peace Prize. Now we're trying to do a reality show. I'm telling you would get from the dark side. You get from being a loser, low self-esteem, doubt, and fear. That you can find your way on this side, guys. It's sweeter on this side. Many of you have not activated who you are because you don't know what you want. Execution is worship. Execution is worship. Execution is worship. Execution is worship. You get away with a lot of stuff when you start executing. And I'm telling you, if you execute, you're going to be on a whole other level. What do you want? And there are those of you in this room, you are great. You are phenomenal. And you're not walking in it. Accept it. And now let's walk in it. The dream is yours, but you're saying, I'm not worthy of the dream. You're probably not, but it's been given to you anyway. I really don't know what I want. I am not walking in my greatness. My esteem is not where it should be. I'm accepting things that I probably shouldn't accept. And when I leave today, I'm ready to embrace the true me. Listen to me, as you're trying to get to that next level of success, you legitimately have to know what that is if somebody's going to be able to help you out. Listen to what I'm saying. I knew what I wanted, and the first thing some of you in this room have to do, you've got to get to the place where you know what you want. And then once you find out what you want, spend the rest of your natural life waking up and going after it. That's what I do. I wake up every single day. And I go after what I want. But if you don't know what you want, what are you even waking up for? E.T., why am I not fired up? E.T., why am I sleeping in? Because you don't have a reason to get up. You don't have a reason to wake up early in the morning. You don't have a reason to work out. But you better stop making excuses and find a way to win. Because once you start winning, I'm telling you, I can't explain it to you. But doors start opening. Opportunities start happening. But what you cannot do is you cannot quit during the process. You cannot give up because it ain't what you see. You cannot give up. And when you become a winner, they start seeing you with winners. And so I need you to create a culture of winning. And do me a favor. You don't have to win at a whole bunch of stuff. Just win one day at a time. You cannot give up. What you got to do is, you heard it. Champions keep going when they don't have anything left in their tank. That's the difference between the greats. That's what separates them. When they don't have no more, when it's over, when they're tired, when they're frustrated, when they're ready to give up, when they spent their last dime, that's when they get started. Are you hearing me? It's when you have nothing left. It's when you depleted all your money, when all your energy gone, when you have nothing left. That's when it's showtime. When you find a way out of no way. When you find breath that you don't have. When you find energy that did not exist. When you want this thing as bad as you want to breathe, that's when you find a way. As bad as you want to breathe, that's when you find a way. I wish I could tell you you're tired, go take a break. I wish I could tell you it's going to get easier. I wish I could tell you that if you just keep going, it's going to get lighter. The weight is going to get light. I wish I could tell you that, but that's not the truth. The truth is you got to find something within.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Daily Stoic.
The Grand Parade of Desire. Robbers, perverts, killers, and tyrants, gather for your inspection their so-called pleasures. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations 6.34. It's never great to judge other people, but it's worth taking a second to investigate how a life dedicated to indulging every whim actually works out. The writer Anne Lamott jokes in Bird by Bird, ever wonder what God thinks of money? Just look at the people he gives it to. The same goes for pleasure. Look at the dictator and his harem filled with plotting, manipulative mistresses. Look how quickly the partying of a young starlet turns to drug addiction and a stalled career. Ask yourself, is that really worth it? Is it really that pleasurable? Consider that when you crave something or contemplate indulging in a harmless vice.
And that was the Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Why is there something rather than nothing? It's an ancient perennial question. The point I'd like to make is it's a properly philosophical question. It's not a scientific question, not a question that can be adjudicated by physics, chemistry, or astronomy, because they're always looking at events and objects and measurable states of affairs within a finite contingent system. And that's fine. That's what the sciences are built to do. But when you ask the question we just asked, that's not a deeper level scientific question. It's a different type of question that takes you out of the epistemological framework of the sciences and introduces you to a higher epistemological framework. One of the problems we face is scientism. One of its dimensions is a tendency to see philosophy as primitive science. They wish they could do real science. What they're doing is some kind of underdeveloped science. No, what they're doing is something qualitatively different than what the sciences do. The collapsing of all the epistemic orders into the scientific is one of the marks, negative marks of our time.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Ayn Rand quote of the day. Quote, when I say capitalism, I mean a full, pure, uncontrolled, unregulated, laissez-faire capitalism, with a separation of state and economics, in the same way and for the same reasons as the separation of state and church. A pure system of capitalism has never existed, not even in America. Capitalism is not the system of the past, it is the system of the future, if mankind is to have a future. Unquote. That was Ayn Rand, The Objectivist Ethics, from the book The Virtue of Selfishness. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the 33 strategies of war.
Passive power. Early in 1820, a revolution broke out in Spain, followed a few months later by one in Naples, which at that time was a city-state incorporated within the Austrian Empire. Forced to accept liberal constitutions modeled on that of revolutionary France some 30 years earlier, the kings of both countries had reason to fear that they also faced the same fate as the French king of that period, Louis XVI, beheaded in 1793. Meanwhile, the leaders of Europe's great powers, England, Austria, and Prussia, quaked at the thought of unrest and radicalism spreading across their borders, which had only recently been stabilized by the defeat of Napoleon. They all wanted to protect themselves and halt the tide of revolution. In the midst of this general unease, Tsar Alexander I of Russia, 1777 to 1825, suddenly proposed a plan that to many seemed a cure more dangerous than the disease. The Russian army was the largest and most feared in Europe. Alexander wanted to send it to both Spain and Naples, crushing the two rebellions. In exchange, he would insist that the kings of both realms enact liberal reforms that would grant their citizens greater freedoms, making them more content and diluting their desire for revolution. Alexander saw his proposal as more than a practical program to safeguard Europe's monarchies. It was part of a great crusade, a dream he had nurtured since the earliest days of his reign. A deeply religious man who saw everything in terms of good and evil, he wanted the monarchies of Europe to reform themselves and create a kind of Christian brotherhood of wise, gentle rulers with himself, the Tsar, at their helm. Although the powerful considered Alexander a kind of Russian madman, many liberals and even revolutionaries throughout Europe saw him as their friend and protector, the rare leader sympathetic to their cause. It was even rumored that he had made contacts with various men of the left and had intrigued with them. The Tsar went further with his idea. Now he wanted a conference of the major powers to discuss the future of Spain, Naples, and Europe itself. The English foreign minister, Lord Castlereagh, wrote letter after letter trying to dissuade him of the need for the meeting. It was never wise to meddle in the affairs of other countries, Castlereagh said. Alexander should leave England to help stop the unrest in Spain, its close ally, while Austria did the same for Naples. Other ministers and rulers wrote to Alexander as well, using similar arguments. It was critical to show a united front against his plan. Yet one man, the Austrian foreign minister, Prince Clemens von Metternich, responded to the Tsar in a much different fashion, and it was shocking to say the least. Metternich was the most powerful and respected minister in Europe. The quintessential realist, he was always slow to take bold action or to involve Austria in any kind of adventure. Security and order were his primary concerns. He was a conservative, a man who believed in the virtues of the status quo. If change had to come, it should come slowly. But Metternich was also something of an enigma. An elegant courtier, he spoke little, yet always seemed to get his way. Now, not only was he supporting Alexander's call for a conference, but he also seemed open to the Tsar's other ideas. Perhaps he had undergone a change of heart and was moving to the left in his later years. In any event, he personally organized the conference for October of that year in the Austrian-held city of Troppau in the modern-day Czech Republic. Alexander was delighted. With Metternich on his side, he could realize his ambitions and then some. When he arrived in Troppau for the conference, however, the representatives of the other powers in attendance were less than friendly. The French and the Prussians were cool. Castlereagh had refused to come altogether. Feeling somewhat isolated, Alexander was delighted again when Metternich proposed they hold private meetings to discuss the Tsar's ideas. For several days, and for hours on end, they holed themselves up together in a room. The Tsar did most of the talking. Metternich listened with his usual attentive air, agreeing and nodding. The Tsar, whose thinking was somewhat vague, strained to explain his vision of Europe as best he could, and the need for the leaders of the conference to display their moral unity. He could not help but feel frustrated at his inability to make his ideas more specific. Several days into these discussions, Metternich finally confessed to the Tsar that he too saw a moral danger brewing in Europe. Godless revolution was the scourge of the time. Giving in to the radical spirit, showing any sign of compromise, would eventually lead to destruction at the hands of these satanic forces. During the Troppau conference, a mutiny had broken out in a regiment of Russian guards. Metternich warned Alexander that this was the first symptom of a revolutionary infection attacking Russia itself. Thank God the Tsar, a pillar of moral strength, would not give in. Alexander would have to serve as the leader of this counter-revolutionary crusade. This was why Metternich had become so excited by the Tsar's ideas about Naples and Spain and how he had interpreted them. The Tsar was swept up in Metternich's enthusiasm. Together, they would stand firm against the radicals. Somehow, though, the result of their conversation was not a plan for Russia to invade Naples and Spain. Indeed, Alexander speculated instead that it might not be the time to press the kings of those countries to reform their governments. That would just weaken both monarchs. For the time being, the leader's energy should go into halting the revolutionary tide. In fact, the Tsar began to repent of some of his more liberal ideas, and he confessed as much to Metternich. The conference ended with a statement of grand common purpose among the powers, much of its language the Tsar's, and an agreement that Austrian troops, not Russian ones, would return the King of Naples to full power, then leave him to pursue the policies of his choice. After Alexander returned to Russia, Metternich wrote to praise him for leading the way. The Tsar wrote back in fervor, "We are engaged in a combat with the realm of Satan. Ambassadors do not suffice for this task. Only those whom the Lord has placed at the head of their peoples may, if he gives his blessings, survive the contest with this diabolic force." In fact, the Tsar wanted to go further. He had returned to the idea of marching his army into Spain to put down the revolution there. Metternich responded that that would not be necessary. The British were handling the situation, but a conference next year could readdress the issue. In early 1821, another revolution broke out, this time in Piedmont, the one Italian state outside Austrian control. The king was forced to abdicate. In this instance, Metternich welcomed Russian intervention, and 90,000 Russian troops became reserves in an Austrian army heading for Piedmont. A Russian military presence so close to their borders greatly dampened the spirits of the rebels and of their sympathizers throughout Italy. All those leftists who had seen the Tsar as their friend and protector, they thought that no more. The Austrian army crushed the revolution within a few weeks. At Metternich's request, the Russians politely withdrew their forces. The Tsar was proud of his growing influence in Europe, but somehow he had embarked on the very opposite of his original plans for a crusade. Instead of being in the forefront of the fight for progress and reform, he had become a guardian of the status quo, a conservative in the mold of Metternich himself. Those around him could not understand how this had happened.
And that was the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And if you're a Democrat, you want to vote Republican because the late modern achievement subject is free, in that it does not encounter repression on the part of sovereign entities external to itself. But in reality, it is just as unfree as the obedient subject. Once exterior repression is overcome, pressure builds within. Thus, the achievement subject develops depression. The violence persists unabated. It merely shifts to the interior. The stages of the topological transformation of violence are decapitation in the sovereignty society, deformation in the disciplinary society, and depression in the achievement society. Violence is increasingly internalized, psychologized, and thus rendered invisible. More and more, it rids itself of the negativity of the other or the enemy, becoming self-referential. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bad News, Chapter 6, The Lesson of the Trump Era. And this is going to be the first half of Chapter 6, because it's a 47-minute chapter.
Chapter 6, The Lesson of the Trump Era. The New York Times entered the digital era under duress. After the 2008 economic crisis, the paper, like many others, was facing a disastrous outlook, and journalists worked amid gloomy prognostications and rumors that payroll would not be met. In 2011, the New York Times bucked the trend of giving away articles online for free and erected a paywall preventing people from accessing more than a limited number of articles unless they pay for them, in what the paper called a subscription-first business model of digital journalism. In so doing, the Times was making a bet that its readers would want to pay for the quality journalism they valued. It was a risky gambit, and one that at first didn't seem like it was paying off. The company had a challenging 2014 and let go 100 people from the newsroom in buyouts and layoffs. As for who was to blame, a report titled Innovation, leaked that year by the New York Times, made it very clear. The divide between the journalistic and business ends of things, a sacred line that ensured journalists weren't motivated by anything but the truth, was at fault. The wall dividing the newsroom and business side has served the Times well for decades, the report found. But the growth in our subscription revenue and the steady decline in advertising now require us to work together. The widespread concern that it is inappropriate for journalists to consult with colleagues on the business side runs directly counter to best practices, which call for collaborating as early as possible to solve problems, it argued. It was time to recognize that the job of the journalist doesn't end with choosing, reporting, and publishing the news. The hard work of growing our audience falls squarely on the newsroom. The Times should be encouraging reporters and editors to promote their stories and helping raise their profiles on social media by sharing best practices. The report's authors were appalled to learn about a project whose reporter didn't tweet about it for 2 days. In response, the report insisted, we need to explicitly urge reporters and editors to promote their work, and we need to thank those who make the extra effort. It was crucial that the Times create a two-way relationship with readers so they can engage with our journalism and our journalists. Of course, as we have seen, journalists have always been aware of who their readers are and have catered to them both consciously and unconsciously. But it was something else entirely to suggest that journalists should be consciously collaborating with the audience to produce user-generated content, as the Times report put it. The report was a group effort led by A.G. Sulzberger, who was getting ready to replace his father as publisher. And it presaged a new direction for the paper of record. It must become digital first or perish. To this end, the Times invested in new subscription services, NYT Cooking and NYT Games, which would turn out to be hugely profitable and key to its strategy for growing its subscriber base and diversifying its revenue streams. Soon after the report came out, the publication also introduced trips, live events, and conferences, and beefed up the style section, one of the few sections making money with its overbooked luxury ads. The Times hired a full-fledged ad agency to work in-house and began allowing brands to sponsor specific lines of reporting. Journalists were asked to accompany advertisers to conferences and in general were pushed to collaborate more closely with the business side, something many of the old-school editors were loath to do. The executive editor at the time, Jill Abramson, resisted strenuously and was given the boot. And then came Trump. As a candidate, Trump made a habit of attacking the press, referring to it as the enemy of the people and making frequent use of the term fake news. With his genius for coming up with cruel nicknames and his enthusiasm for undignified public brawling, he started calling the Times the failing New York Times on his Twitter feed and at his rallies. But for all the vitriol, the relationship between the press and the former president was a perfectly symbiotic one. Like many populists and Republicans before him, Trump capitalized on the feeling many had that the media had changed and that the journalists chronicling American life looked down on regular people. And like many before him, he was not wrong, though few have expressed the sentiment in such crass terms. But the crasser he was, the more flamboyantly he trashed the class norms of politesse that the press expected from a presidential candidate, the more the press and its audience couldn't get enough of him. Trump's antics in the 2015 campaign were catnip for a flailing media industry. Ratings and page views began to soar, and the press gave Trump even more airtime and article inches, planting the seeds of his 2016 victory. The more outrageous he was, the more they covered him, giving him hours upon hours of attention worth its weight in gold. Estimates put the monetary value of the free press Trump got at around $2 billion, 6 times what any of his rivals in the Republican primary received. They were giving him attention because it was profitable. CBS's executive chairman, Les Moonves, famously said that the Trump campaign may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. Ben Smith reported that in 2016, the head of NBC News warned colleagues that MSNBC was set to take a 30% hit after Hillary Clinton was elected. Needless to say, that hit was avoided with the election of Donald Trump. Leaked tapes revealed that the president of CNN, a network that made a big show of its opposition to Trump, encouraged Trump to run and even offered him tips on how to win a CNN-sponsored debate. What these recordings reveal is that CNN's cartoonish role as a determined and vituperative fake news media foil to Trump, while perhaps real for some of the reporters and broadcasters involved, is at least to some degree kabuki theater for executives, wrote journalist Matt Taibbi. Even as president, Trump to network leaders is first and foremost a commodity, and an extraordinarily valuable one at that. This kabuki theater was good for Trump and good for the press, and the mutually beneficial fighting transcended medium. The day Trump tweeted that Vanity Fair's circulation was way down, big trouble, dead, the magazine's subscriptions soared. It was the largest number of subscriptions ever sold in a single day at Condé Nast. The publication got 10,000 new followers on Twitter. Hating Trump was just good business. It drove massive amounts of engagement to publications, channels, and shows that had been floundering. Individual journalists didn't need to be told by their bosses to keep Trump's name in their mouths, articles, and tweets. They could see firsthand the likes, retweets, and exploding page views that their opposition to the president was generating. With the incentives so aligned, there wasn't even really a need to break down whatever was left of the wall between advertising and editorial. It happened on its own. It was this more than anything else that Trump made visible, that the coverage of any Trumpian wrongdoing, much of it real, much of it imagined, reflected. It can both be the case. Indeed, it is both the case that Trump made a lot of very real mistakes as a candidate and president, and that the media's obsession with him went beyond all proportion due to an unignorable profit motive. The media justified its obsession with Trump by pointing out again and again, hundreds of times a day, that he was not a normal president. In an interview with NPR, New York Times executive editor Dean Baquet brought up coverage of the civil rights era to argue that it would be cowardly not to use the most extreme terms to talk about Trump, a ridiculous, hysterical invocation that Baquet himself acknowledged was over the top, even while leaning into it. But such hyperbole would become normalized in no small part due to the New York Times. In a column titled, "Trump is Testing the Norms of Objectivity in Journalism," Jim Rutenberg argued that because Trump is a demagogue playing to the nation's worst racist and nationalistic tendencies, it was time to throw out the textbook American journalism has been using for the better part of the past half-century. What the media, sequestered in the most pro-Clinton districts in America, could not fathom was that there were many, many Americans for whom Donald Trump felt like a better option than Hillary Clinton. And because it could not fathom this, journalists went to great lengths to come up with alternative explanations for his victory. On November 16, 2016, when most Americans were still reeling from Trump's surprise win, a BuzzFeed report found that in the last 3 months of the campaign, false news reports about the election had generated more Facebook engagement, over 1 million more shares, reactions, and comments than coverage by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and NBC News. The BuzzFeed story seemed to confirm exactly what liberals wanted to believe. Trump's supporters had been duped, not just by a man willing to call Mexicans rapists, but by obviously fake news stories like Pope Francis shocks world, endorses Donald Trump, and WikiLeaks confirms Hillary Clinton sold weapons to ISIS, the two top performing stories of the final 3 months of the election. You could sense the relief oozing out of the thousands and thousands of journalists sharing the BuzzFeed piece. After all, how could it be their fault that they missed Donald Trump's rise and eventual win if his voters were capable of believing such nonsense? Trump's voters weren't just wrong, they were inscrutably wrong because they were stupid enough to believe things like FBI agent suspected in Hillary email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide. It was the perfect story for the liberal news media, seeming to confirm that those who disagreed with them were not only wrong but stupid, believing all kinds of nonsense. They were less keen to report that 2 out of 3 Democrats believed that Russia tampered with vote tallies on Election Day, something for which there exists no evidence whatsoever. It's no doubt true that fake news made the rounds on the left and the right throughout the campaign. But most Americans still get their news from traditional media sources. Moreover, the BuzzFeed article failed to tell us if anyone changed their vote due to a fake news report about Hillary Clinton's ISIS connections. Absent such data, the story didn't prove much of anything at all. It certainly didn't explain why so many people had voted for Trump. But it would prove to be only the first of many such misfires by the press. Type the words Trump and Russia into the New York Times search bar and you'll get over 15,000 results. At the Washington Post, this search will bring up 27,000 entries since 2015. Compare this to the phrase opioid crisis over the same period, which returns just 1,047 results at the Times and 2,639 at the Washington Post. Homelessness gets a mere 4,818 results, and income inequality gets just under 3,000. And this despite the fact that the Mueller investigation essentially found no collusion on the part of the Trump campaign with Russia, despite the fact that other much-hyped narratives that Trump was being held hostage by foreign operatives in possession of Russian kompromat showing him cavorting with escorts, that a group called Cambridge Analytica was selling psychological profiles of Americans to the highest bidder, and even, as promised by the Times, that Trump's tax returns would show deep ties to Russia and conflicts with national security, turned out to be either false or deeply misleading. As Taibbi put it in his book Hate Inc., Why Today's Media Makes Us Despise One Another, for years every pundit and Democratic poll in Washington hyped every new Russia headline like the Watergate break-in. And yet the only thing they managed to uncover with Trump was him paying off a porn star. Taibbi started keeping a list of Russia-Trump bombshells that the media hyped and then discarded as it became clear that there was nothing in them. This generation's weapons of mass destruction, he came to call them, as the list ballooned to 50. It's led to most journalists accepting a radical change in mission, Taibbi concluded. We've become sides choosers, obliterating the concept of the press as an independent institution whose primary role is sorting fact and fiction. Though this was journalistic malpractice, from the business side of things, it was manna from heaven, especially at the New York Times. Subscriptions soared in 2016 after the moribund years of the 2010s. During the last 3 months of 2016, the Times added 276,000 digital subscribers compared to 184,000 for all of 2015. While Trump was tweeting, "Wow, the New York Times is losing thousands of subscribers because of their very poor and highly inaccurate coverage of the Trump phenomenon," he was actually sending subscribers its way by the thousands. In 2017, the paper brought in $340 million in online subscriptions, 46% more than the previous year, and equal to the annual average growth rate since 2011. 46% growth rate is what Facebook boasts, as Vox pointed out, and double Google's growth rate, which is 23%. In 2019, the company added more than 1 million new digital-only subscribers, reaching a high of 5.2 million. It met its 2020 $800 million digital revenue target a year early. And its journalists were not insensate to the product this new audience was here for. In 2017, Trump was mentioned the equivalent of once every 250 words. That's 2 or 3 times per article. This average encompasses all articles from across the paper, including the sports, style, food, and travel sections, writes Musa Al-Gharbi, the sociologist who drilled down on these numbers. It suggests little is published without some reference to Trump. He is the lens through which many other stories are filtered. Trump was the 4th most used word in the entire New York Times in 2017. In 2018, the New York Times published the word Trump 93,292 times. Lest you think this is just a function of his being president, consider President Obama, who in 2009 was mentioned in the Times just 47,968 times. During the election, Clinton was mentioned about 34,000 times compared to Trump's nearly 77,000 mentions. In other words, the race was clearly about Trump. He was mentioned more than twice as much as his competitor, concludes Al-Gharbi. The obsession with Trump went beyond the New York Times. All the major national news outlets played the game, where hyperbolically covering every one of Trump's tweets was repackaged as bravery and truth by liberal journalists. The reality-based national press, though flawed and stuck for too long in outdated conventions, has managed to do its job with dedication and with bravery, given the dangers created by Trump's antipathy to what he calls the enemy of the people, was how Margaret Sullivan put it in a self-flattering look back at the media throughout the Trump era. But what it really showed was that the wall between business strategy and editorial strategy had all but disappeared. Trump drove sales, so Trump drove editorial. And you didn't need the back and forth promised by the Times' innovation report to get there. The incentives of journalists wanting their stories to go viral and business executives selling subscriptions and then memberships were completely aligned. Even more than sales, Trump drove engagement, and he allowed the Times to lean into the business model pioneered by the biggest publisher on the planet, Facebook. For a time, the Times relied on third-party data to sell ads. Information about readers, their income bracket, age group, and zip code gathered by a company that mines the internet for such information. A publication like the New York Times could use this information to do what it's always done, target ads to the right, affluent readers. But in May 2020, the paper announced it would no longer use third-party data, not just because the practice had come under criticism for the breach of privacy, but because the Times just didn't need third parties anymore. It had enough of its own first-party data to offer advertisers. It had collected this data and collated it into categories based on age, generation, educational and marital status, interests, business industry, and level, income, and assets. This can only work because we have 6 million subscribers and millions more registered users that we can identify, and because we have a breadth of content, Allison Murphy, Senior Vice President of Ad Innovation, told Axios. In other words, the Times could afford to abandon the third-party data gatherers because it had replaced them. There was another equally important way that the Times was successfully imitating Facebook. In 2018, high on the success of the Trump era, the data science group at the Times launched Project Feels, designed to help understand and predict the emotional impact of the paper's articles. The group asked 1,200 readers to rate how articles made them feel, giving them a series of options that included boredom, hate, interest, fear, hope, love, and happiness. These readers were young and well-educated, the target audience of many advertisers. What they found was perhaps not surprising. Emotions drive engagement. Across the board, articles that were top in emotional categories such as love, sadness, and fear performed significantly better than articles that were not, the team reported. They then took that information to the Times' advertising and marketing services department to perform an ad effectiveness campaign. Their conclusion? Readers' emotional response to articles is useful for predicting advertising engagement. To monetize the insight, the data science group then created an artificial intelligence machine learning algorithm to predict which emotions future articles would evoke. The New York Times now sells this insight to advertisers, which can choose from 18 emotions, 7 motivations, and 100 topics they want the reader to be feeling or thinking about when they encounter an ad. By identifying connections between content and emotion, we've successfully driven ad engagement 6 times more effectively than IAB benchmarks, the Times' advertising website proudly declares. Brands can target ads to specific articles we predict will evoke particular emotions in our readers, it pitches. Brands have the opportunity to target ads to articles we predict will motivate our readers to take a particular action. As of April 2019, Project Fields had generated 50 campaigns, more than 30 million impressions, and strong revenue results. The Project Fields impresarios insist that their insights are produced without coordination with the newsroom and that their findings will never impact our news report or other editorial decisions. And yet, the Times' own executive editor, Dean Baquet, admitted that he is deeply involved in the business side of journalism. I think of myself as primarily the executive editor whose job it is to ensure the quality and the integrity of the report, he told Kara Swisher and Peter Kafka at Recode's Code Media Conference in September of 2015. He went on, but I also think of myself as somebody whose job it is to preserve the New York Times, which means I do think about advertising. I do think about the New York Times as a business. That does not mean that I drop the wall and sell ads, but it does mean that I think about the whole of the enterprise. The truth is the business side doesn't need to control editorial for it to have the intended effect. The emotions driving journalists toward fame are the same ones driving people to share articles on Facebook. Journalists know what kinds of stories do well on social media, and every journalist does their darndest to get their work read as widely as possible. The incentives of journalists are so neatly aligned with those of Project Fields that they almost don't need to coordinate. A quick glance through the New York Times is proof that, at least when it comes to Trump, there is a perfect alignment between the two. But this new emotion-driven, sensationalist approach to journalism at the Times isn't just a canny appropriation of Facebook's business model. It's also a return to the sensationalism of a bygone era and a complete reversal of where the newspaper once positioned itself on that question. 150 years ago, Joseph Pulitzer and, prior to him, Benjamin Day were derided for their sensationalist approach to journalism that sought to directly access the emotions of their poor and working-class readers. The New York Times was founded as a reaction to that sensationalism, seeking a more staid approach to attract a more affluent readership. So it's more than a little ironic to see the paper embracing the sensationalist approach it once derided, with one important difference. Where Day and Pulitzer appealed to the sensations of the poor and working classes, the Times' revamped sensationalism today is designed to prick the emotions of the rich. If you want to know what makes America's educated liberal elites emotional, you only have to open the New York Times to find out. But out of the coverage of Trump would come another important lesson about the national press in the 21st century. Russiagate was certainly a big part of the media's response to Trump, but it was only one of the obsessions that would animate the coverage of the former president. The other was the idea that Trump is a reflection of America's persistent, enduring, state-sponsored white supremacy.
And that's the end of the first half of Chapter 6, the lesson of the Trump era. And next week we will have the second half of Chapter 6 from Bad News, How Woke Media is Undermining Democracy by Badia Unger Sargar. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.